Boldwood presents The Clark's Factory Girls at War, written by Mary Ellis and read by Catherine Press. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. August 1914.
"I can't believe we've been at Clark's for 2 years already," said Louisa. "Do you remember our first day? We thought we were so grown up, didn't we?" She laughed. "We were so wet behind the ears. We've learned a lot since then."
Her friends Jeannie and Kate laughed with her as the three of them climbed the stone steps to the machine room where they worked on the 3rd floor of the main factory building. Above and below them was a steady stream of women and girls, all heading in the same direction. The three of them linked arms, their heads close together so they could hear each other above the noise of boots on the steps and the women's chatter, as they'd done every day for the past 2 years since they started work together on this very day.
"Oh my word, I was so scared," said Kate. "I was so glad you two were with me, or I'm sure I'd have turned tail and run."
That surprised Louisa because Kate always seemed so fearless. She was the first to argue, the last to back down, and she had the loudest laugh of the three of them.
"Why were you scared?"
she asked.
Kate shrugged. "I stood in the doorway, looking around that huge room. It was noisy and smelly and, I don't know, overwhelming, I suppose."
"I know what you mean," said Jeannie. She was the quietest of the trio, brought up in a Quaker family, generations of whom had worked for Clark's and worshipped alongside the family who owned the factory. She had a calm and thoughtfulness that Louisa appreciated and didn't often find amongst her other acquaintances.
"I always knew a lot of women worked in here," Kate went on, "including my sister Peg until she got married. But seeing all 300 of them in the one big room was a shock."
Jeannie nodded.
"The smell of the machine oil and the leather made me feel sick. I was sure I'd skewer my hands on the machines the first time I used them, and the foreman scared me to death."
The industrial sewing machines on which the girls were trained to stitch shoe linings were big and fierce, as was Mr. Briers, the foreman. It had taken some getting used to, and many a week had passed before they got the hang of the machines and didn't lose a good portion of their wages by being charged for wasted thread when they made mistakes and had to unpick their pieces.
"I'm glad we started together," said Louisa,
remembering her.
"So am I," said Jeannie. "Being with you both, my best friends from school, made it more exciting than frightening. And it was lucky Mr. Briers used the same system as our teachers of putting girls in alphabetical order, so we got to stay together. Jeannie, Kate, and Louisa. JKL.
Louisa squeezed her arm.
"I remember our first day at school. I knew Kate from church, but you were a stranger to me. But then I fell over in the playground and scraped my knee, and you helped me up and gave me your apple to cheer me up. I was so glad you ended up sitting with us."
The girls had been inseparable ever since.
"Yes," said Kate. "It was a relief when Mr. Briers put us together again. I wouldn't want to work next to anyone else. But you know, Louisa, I was always surprised you didn't stay on at school. I mean, your pa's a foreman, and you don't have any brothers and sisters. Me and Jeannie both had to work to help put food on the table, but you didn't."
Louisa pulled a face.
"Ma and Pa wanted me to stay on, but what was the point? You know me, I'm not the brightest spark. I like reading and drawing, but I was forever struggling with my lessons." "But you always did well," Jeannie protested. "Only because Ma stood over me and made me study really hard," she confessed. "By the time I got to 14 and you were both leaving school, I couldn't bear it any longer." "Oh my," said Jeannie. "You never mentioned it before. What did they say?"
Louisa laughed.
"Plenty. I didn't mention it because I didn't think they would ever agree to it. But I stuck to my guns, and in the end they gave in. I mean, they both left school when they were 12, and they've done all right for themselves. So what was wrong with me leaving at 14? In fact, I was almost 15 by then, wasn't I? On account of my late summer birthday. Anyway, I don't regret it. I love working with you two, even when Mr. Bryers is breathing down our necks, telling us to work more and chat less. Said Kate, frowning as they reached the top of the stone stairs that were worn down in the middle by the feet of thousands of workers over the decades. I expect they'll want to work us even harder if all the lads are going to rush off to fight. I can't believe Mr. Asquith has declared war. It's not like England has been attacked, is it? It's the folks on the continent who are in dispute, not us. Pa says it's because we had a treaty with Belgium to protect them if they were invaded, said Louisa. The Kaiser has sent his troops through Belgium on their way to France, so the Prime Minister had no choice but to honour the treaty and enter the war against Germany, said Jeannie. They should be talking, not fighting. Louisa knew that the Quakers, or Friends as they referred to themselves, adhered to a peace testimony that meant they were against all forms of violent conflict. I'm not sure we have a choice, she said gently. But Pa says we'll soon chase them out of Belgium and France. Then things will settle down again. As they entered the vast machine room, she was aware that the conversations around them were all focusing on the news that the country was at war. Some sounded excited, others fearful. Louisa felt uneasy, but at least she didn't have brothers who might be sent off to fight like Kate and Jeannie did. Her unease grew when she saw that Miss Alice Clark, one of the directors of the company, was waiting to speak to them. It took a few minutes for everyone to be gathered together and a step to be found for Miss Alice to stand on so that all the women could see her. Ladies, she greeted them, her tone solemn. This is a sad day. Our country is at war. This is particularly painful for the Friends among us who adhere to the peace testimony, and no doubt to every woman who faces the prospect of her menfolk being forced to fight. I urge thee all to pray for peace, and for the Kaiser to change his ways in the face of the worldwide condemnation of his actions. War is never the answer. We must urge our leaders to pursue a peaceful resolution. No one spoke as she paused, looking around at the women and girls standing in the aisles between the machines. One or two fidgeted. Louisa knew that the women on piecework would be itching to get on to ensure they didn't lose any wages. She was glad she was still paid on a day rate, which meant she received a steady wage, albeit lower than she might earn on piecework. She and her friends had been told they might be promoted onto piecework soon if they continued to work well, and their wages would go up provided they worked hard. As for our lives here in Somerset, Miss Alice continued, her voice clear and firm, we must continue as usual, living and working as God would expect us, in service and kindness. We shall go forward with fortitude. But be warned, ladies, we at Clark's will not tolerate any warmongering on these premises. Whatever thy beliefs, and those of thy menfolk, I urge thee all to look within yourselves for divine guidance in these difficult times. She spoke for a few more minutes in the same vein, then sent everyone to their machines to work. Well, that's told us, said Kate under her breath. Keep quiet. I thought it was a good speech, said Jeannie. You're both right, said Louisa. There's nothing we can do but pray and carry on as usual, and Miss Alice put it very well, even though I still find her way of speaking a little old-fashioned. A lot of older Quakers use thee and thou in their speech, said Jeannie. She shrugged. I suppose I'm used to it. Louisa nodded. It doesn't matter. It's the sentiment behind her words that is important. Let's hope my pa's right and it will all blow over quickly. I hear there's already a few lads in Clicking who want to enlist, said Kate. While Louisa's pa was a foreman in Clicking, Jeannie's brother Lucas, and one of Kate's brothers, her brother-in-law and her pa, also worked there, the latter staying firmly on day rates, as he never wanted to make the effort to earn more on piecework.
It was officially called the cutting department, where the leather skins were cut into the components of Clark's shoes and boots, but everyone knew it as the clicking room, on account of the noise made by the cutters, or clickers, as they snipped through the hides.
"My pa's all for them going. Says he'd go himself if he wasn't too old." She laughed. "He's not just too old, but he's hardly fighting fit either. He's had too many ciders over the years for that."
"What about your brothers?" Kate had 2 older brothers, George and Fred, who were already married. George worked at his father-in-law's haulage business, while Fred was the clicker. She shrugged.
"I think they've got more sense than to sign up if they don't have to. They've both got kiddies now, so I expect their wives will have something to say about it as well."
"I'm worried about Lucas," said Jeannie. Her older brother was 18 and unmarried, so would probably be expected to fight. "He says he won't go, but what if he's forced to? In other wars, friends have been persecuted. Some have been jailed and others even executed." She blinked rapidly, tears welling. "It would kill Ma if anything happened to him. And if this war goes on too long, the twins might face the same fate." Her younger brothers, Peter and John, were 13.
"I'm sure it won't go on that long,"
said Kate, but she didn't look convinced.
"Let's not invite trouble. I'm sure the Clarks will protect their workers. They're not going to want anyone to go off and fight."
None of them addressed the question of whether Lucas might face punishment for refusing to fight. Louisa couldn't imagine it. Surely the Clark family would have some influence and be able to save Quaker lads from such a fate.
"You mustn't invite trouble by worrying, Jeannie, love. I'm sure this will all blow over. Anyway, we'd better get on. Mr. Briers is giving us the evil eye."
The girls worked steadily through until lunchtime. They'd all brought some food and sat outside on the grass between the factory buildings to eat in the good weather. None of them had the heart to talk about the war again, even though it seemed to hang over their heads like a dark cloud.
"I need some advice,"
said Louisa, after they'd finished eating and were enjoying the August sunshine for a few minutes before they had to go back to work.
"About what?"
asked Jeannie.
"My ma's got a bee in her bonnet now I'm nearly 17. She seems to think that as I'm not going to be a teacher like she wanted, I should be looking to get married as soon as I can." "But that's daft," said Kate. "There's no rush, surely." "I know, that's what I said. But she keeps going on that she doesn't want me working in the factory all my life, and I should make a good marriage to a man who can look after me, like Pa looks after us." "I'd love to get married," said Jeannie, her expression dreamy. "Really?" asked Kate, looking appalled. "I want some fun before I settle down."
"If you marry someone you love and who loves you, it should be fun, shouldn't it?" Jeannie asked, her expression earnest. Kate laughed, although she didn't look amused.
"There's not much fun in cooking and cleaning and fetching for a man, and then having to ask him for money to buy yourself a well-deserved treat. Ask my ma. I'm not in any rush to end up like her. I'm definitely not keen on getting married any time soon."
"I don't mind the idea of getting wed eventually," said Louisa. "But I'm like you, Kate. I want to live a bit before I settle down. And anyways, I want to choose my own husband. Someone handsome, who I love, and who loves me."
"Got your eye on anyone?"
Kate grinned. She tried not to look too coy.
"I might have. There's a certain lad I see on the way to work and back. I've seen him around, but he's a couple of years older than us, so I don't know him. He lives in the Mead. He's really dreamy, brown hair, tall and handsome, with beautiful eyes."
"Hang on, you're not talking about Mattie Searle, are you?" asked Jeannie, sitting up a little straighter.
"I think that's his name,"
Louisa confirmed.
"Why?"
Kate laughed. "He's my sister Peg's brother-in-law. She's married to his older brother Will." "And he's Lucas's best friend," said Jeannie, her voice quieter than usual. Louisa glanced at her, her heart sinking. "Don't you like him?" she asked. Jeannie shrugged her shoulders, not looking at her friend.
"He's a nice lad," she said. "But you know he's a friend, don't you?" "Do you mean a Quaker or a pal?" Kate giggled. "She means a Quaker, of course. Pa was spitting mad when Peg announced she was marrying Will, seeing as how we're Anglican. Not that Pa bothers going to church these days, but he still wouldn't have anything to do with Peg marrying Will, so they had a ceremony at the Friends' meeting house. Pa wouldn't even come to the wedding. But Ma was all right about it, as she and Mrs. Searle are good friends. They're like us, went to school together and started at Clark's together. Mrs. Searle is a widow now, and came back to work in the trimmings department after her husband died and her boys started work." Louisa frowned. "I don't think my pa would be happy with me courting a friend." Jeannie nodded, looking sympathetic. "A lot of Anglican folks don't like their children courting friends." "And vice versa," said Kate. "I think our Peg and her Will are the exception, although it wasn't easy for them." She sniffed. "It seems a bit strange that all the churches preach loving our neighbours, then get their knickers in a twist when we do just that. Our vicar acts like Peg's not there if he passes her in the village. He gave Ma a right telling off for letting her marry outside the church." "What did your Ma say to that?" asked Louisa. Kate sighed. "She tried to explain that Will is a good man, but he wasn't having any of it. Told her he expected her to bring Peg back into the fold and to be at services on a Sunday. That he wouldn't consider her legitimately married until she brought her man into the Anglican faith and entered into a marriage in the church. Course, our Peg isn't having any of it, and I don't blame her. The Quaker marriage is as legal as anything at Holy Trinity. It's not like she's committed a sin or anything." Her friends nodded. "But what with the vicar and Pa giving her grief, well, Ma was in tears over it all." "Your poor Ma," said Louisa. "I know," said Kate, looking fed up. "I've told her she should pay them no mind. Peg and Will are perfect for each other, and that's that. I said we should start going to the Methodist church, where my brother Fred goes with his missus, but she won't have it." Jeannie nodded, her expression solemn. "That happens all the time. Why, even the Clarks refused to accept a marriage of one of their own when he wed an Anglican lass in her church. It wasn't until the bride joined the Friends that they relented. Then her family got upset." She shook her head as she looked at Louisa. "It's difficult. Don't expect your Ma and Pa to accept you courting a lad who's a friend, Lou. It's not like Mattie would join the Anglicans, even for love." Louisa pulled a face. "But he's so handsome." Shivery inside. "There must be some nice lads at Holy Trinity. Or what about the other churches?" There were a couple of nonconformist churches, plus the Salvation Army, and even the Tin Church, a sister church to the parish church of Holy Trinity. It had been built as a temporary structure at the other end of the village, as the community grew around the factory, but it was still in use decades on. "None of the lads at our church are worth a second glance," Louisa replied. "Especially not the one Ma wants me to go to the summer picnic with." "Why, what's wrong with him?" asked Jeannie. "Is it just on account of your Ma liking him?" "Of course not." She pulled a face. "Well, partly, I suppose. But he's not handsome. In fact, he's greasy and spotty and laughs like a donkey." Kate giggled. "Do you mean Horace, who works in the office?" Louisa pulled a face. "Yes, that's him. Ma thinks he's a good prospect, seeing as he's a pen pusher. She keeps saying he'll grow out of his faults soon enough. But I've spoken to him. He's the most boring lad I've ever met in my life. I don't see how he can grow out of being dull." "Oh, you poor love," said Kate, trying not to laugh. "At least he'll come home clean and tidy," said Jeannie, always the one to look on the bright side. "The lads from the clicking room reek of leather and machine oil." "So do we," pointed out Kate. "Although I suppose we're not as sweaty as the lads. At least we get to sit down while we work." "Anyway, Ma says I should go to the picnic with him." "Has he asked you?" asked Jeannie. Louisa shook her head, looking disgusted. "No, of course not. I don't think he's any keener than I am. It's our mothers who are planning it all." "Do you have to go at all?" said Kate. "I'm not going. They used to be fun when we were kids, but I told Ma I'm too old for it these days. Sunday is my only day off, so apart from going to services with her, I'm not inclined to waste the rest of the day there." Louisa frowned. She hadn't thought of that. "Do you know, you're right. I don't see why I should go either." Even as she said it, she knew her parents would disapprove. But she'd rather face that than spend an afternoon with the lad her ma was pushing her towards. "Why don't we have our own picnic?" said Jeannie. "We could walk up Collard Hill to the Hood Monument." "Or Glastonbury Tor," said Kate. Jeannie wrinkled her nose. "There's always people up there. There's more space at Collard Hill, and if it's too hot, we can find shade in the woods." "Good point." Louisa was thoughtful. "I don't suppose you'd invite—" knowing her cheeks were going pink as she thought about the handsome Mattie Searle. "I doubt they'll come," said Jeannie, not looking at Louisa. She wondered what was bothering her. "Lucas still thinks I'm a kid, so he's not likely to want to spend time with us." Kate snorted. "You're as mature as he is. Stupid lads think that just because they're a couple of years older they're smarter and better. Truth is, we're the superior sex, and one of these days they'll start to realise it." Louisa grinned. "Have you been reading those suffragette papers again?" She lifted her chin. "What if I have? Even Miss Alice Clark believes women should be given the vote. Maybe if women were in charge, the country wouldn't be rushing headlong into war." The works hooter sounded, reminding everyone that they had 5 minutes to get back to work. The girls got up and brushed off their skirts before hurrying back to the machine room. Louisa had a feeling that something was bothering Jeannie. She wondered if she disapproved of Louisa wanting to get to know the Quaker lad. It wasn't like Jeannie to judge. But their break was over, so she didn't have time to ask her. It occurred to her that Jeannie might like him too, and her heart sank. If her friend really did like the lad, Louisa couldn't in all conscience ignore that. They'd been friends for too long. She'd have to put her own feelings aside for Jeannie's sake. Yet this lad, this Mattie Searle, this Quaker boy, was the only person who had ever made Louisa's heart race just at the sight of him walking down the lane. He was the only one who made her blush when he smiled at her. What if he was the only one who could ever make her feel like this? Chapter 2.
"What's this your mother tells me about you not going to the church picnic?"
Louisa closed her eyes briefly, trying not to groan in frustration. Her mother always got her father involved in their arguments. Ma had gone to visit someone from the parish who was poorly this evening, no doubt to give Pa a chance to have this conversation with their stubborn daughter.
"I've been invited to go out with my friends from work, Pa. We're going to walk up Collard Hill and have our own picnic."
He frowned. "You see your friends every day at the factory. Sunday is family time. Your mother's upset that you seem to want to spend more time with other people and not with her."
She sighed.
"We might see each other at work, but we never get a chance to talk for more than a few minutes at break times, do we? Ma should know that. She worked there before I was born, didn't she?"
"She did. And she devoted her Sundays to her family."
Louisa was beginning to think she'd never get the chance to go out with her friends, or to get to know Mattie Searle. The thought of having to spend time in the just because her mother thought he was a good prospect filled her with dread and revulsion.
"It's only this Sunday, Pa. Please. It's not as though Ma is planning on being with me at the picnic. Have you seen the lad she wants me to go with?"
She shuddered and pulled a face.
"I can't bear to be near him."
He tried to look stern, but she could see a glint of amusement in his blue eyes that were so like his daughter's.
"Young Horace is from a good family."
"So are my friends," she countered, feeling a little braver. "And they don't smell or laugh like a donkey."
Her father raised an eyebrow, but didn't disagree with her description of the lad.
"I wouldn't say young Kate's family is quite our kind of people. Reggie Davis isn't what I'd call a good man. He's a little too fond of his cider, and has never been a grafter.
But Kate's not like her pa. She's like her ma, who's a very good woman. Mrs. Davis is lovely. You see her in church every Sunday without fail. She isn't making Kate go to the picnic with her."
He grumbled, but didn't argue. "And I suppose your other friend, that Quaker girl, is in on these plans?"
Louisa nodded. "Jeannie's coming too. The Musgroves are good people too. It's been hard for them since their pa was killed in that accident at the factory all those years ago."
He still didn't look pleased. Louisa had learned to stay silent about her Quaker friends from an early age, but it didn't mean she agreed with her father.
"Anyone else?" he asked.
She felt her cheeks warming, but couldn't stop it. "There might be a few others," she said, looking away. "Just a few friends from work." He was silent, studying her, no doubt knowing what she wasn't saying.
"So why don't you invite Horace to go with you and your friends?" he said after a few moments. "He works at the factory as well."
"What?"
Louisa almost shrieked the word. She was horrified.
"No! The whole reason I want to go with my friends is to avoid him. Please, Pa, don't suggest this to Ma. If you do, I'll just take to my bed and refuse to do anything."
She crossed her arms over her chest, glaring at him. Could this get any worse? Her father narrowed his eyes and sighed.
"Louisa Clements, I swear you'll be the death of me. So, you're going on a walk up Collard Hill with young Kate and Jeannie and some lads, eh?"
She gulped, wondering how she could avoid admitting it.
"What makes you say that?"
He glared at her now, as she tried not to squirm in her chair.
"If you were just going with a group of lasses, he would have said so, and no one would have expected—"
Her heart sank as she realised her mistake, but she was her father's daughter, and she wasn't about to give up now. She raised her chin and looked him in the eye, praying her warm cheeks would settle down.
"Jeannie's brother will likely come," she admitted. "You know Lucas. He works for you. He's the man of the Musgrove house since their pa died. He'll make sure we don't get into any mischief. Not that we would, anyway. We're not children anymore, Pa. We just want to spend some time with our friends outside of work."
When he didn't say anything, she huffed.
"And it's Ma's fault. If she didn't keep trying to push me into talking to lads I've no interest in, it wouldn't be a problem."
"She just wants to see you settled, lass," he said, his tone a little gentler.
"As you say, you're not a child anymore. The sooner you're safely married, the better."
Louisa frowned.
"There's no rush, is there? I'm hardly on the shelf yet."
"I'll not have lads sniffing around you like dogs on heat," he grumbled. "You make sure you don't let Lucas Musgrove or anyone else touch you, my lass, or there'll be trouble. Your ma's looking out for you, trying to find you a good Christian lad."
"Quakers are Christians too, Pa."
He scowled.
"Not in my book," he said. "They might be good people. The Clarks are testament to that, with all the good works they undertake. This village wouldn't be what it is without the Clark family. But they and their friends don't pray or worship like we do. They don't even accept the Nicene Creed or say the Lord's Prayer. And they'll be hiding behind that peace testimony of theirs now that there's a war on, refusing to fight. It's not right. Everyone will have to do their bit to defeat the Kaiser. So don't you go having any ideas about courting lads outside of our church, Louisa. I'll not have it."
She closed her eyes, disappointment making her ache.
"Does that mean I can't go out with my friends on Sunday?"
She didn't add that she would not, under any circumstances, go to the church picnic now. She'd already made that clear. She'd rather stay home on her own. But her father must have realised it anyway.
"You can go," he said,
although it was clear from his tone and his scowl he wasn't happy about it.
"But don't go making plans for any other Sundays, my girl. It's a day for God and family, not gadding about."
She nodded, keeping her gaze downcast so that he wouldn't see the delight and excitement in her eyes.
"I won't. Thank you, Pa."
She took herself off to bed before her mother arrived home.
She'd leave Pa to tell her that her plans had been thwarted this time. Louisa didn't doubt there would be another battle over Horace or some other lad from church. Her thoughts were more engaged with the prospect of her outing on Sunday, and maybe getting to speak to Mattie Searle at long last. Chapter 3. Kate was thoughtful as she walked home from the factory the next day. Louisa had been triumphant that her father had given her permission to miss the church picnic for the first time in her life. It seemed strange to her that Louisa's parents were so strict about her attending church services and social events. Kate's pa never went near the church, and her ma was happy when she accompanied her to church, but she never forced Kate, or any of her siblings when they lived at home, into going every time. "You must make your own choices," she'd said. "Our church gives me comfort and hope, but I know that others are just as content in the meeting house or in one of the other denominations. So as long as you love God and respect his wishes for us, that's fine with me. We're all his children after all. It doesn't matter where or how we worship him." The Davis siblings had taken her at her word. Her brother George and his wife Ada attended the parish church services, although they didn't get involved with much else there. Older brother Fred and his wife Vi went to the Methodist church, where Vi's family had always worshipped. Her sister Peg had joined the Friends at the Quaker meeting house, as her husband Will was born a Quaker. Kate's ma was happy that all of her children regularly worshipped God in their own ways and lived good lives. But Louisa's parents were a different kettle of fish. As far as they were concerned, if you weren't an Anglican, you weren't a proper Christian. It seemed strange to Kate, given that their employers, the Clarks, were Friends and led their lives according to the Quaker ethos. While Mr. Clements was a loyal employee at the factory and had done well for himself there, Louisa had confided to Kate that she often heard him sneering about the Friends in the privacy of his own home. And now Louisa's ma and pa were going on about her finding a proper Christian husband. As she approached the Davis family home, Kate shook her head. She couldn't understand why Mr. and Mrs. Clements were so two-faced about the factory owners. Her own pa was almost as bad, constantly complaining about them, although in Kate's opinion, that was simply because he would rather spend his time drinking cider than working, while the Clark family were mostly teetotal and members of the temperance movement. It amused her that both of their fathers grumbled about the same thing, but for very different reasons. The Clark family not only provided good jobs for thousands of people in Street and the surrounding areas, but they were good people. They'd built the schools, as well as the community centre at Crispin Hall, and they were talking about building a new library soon. They had just started sending the younger factory lads and lasses to the new day while they were aged between 14 and 16. Kate had missed out on that, but Jeannie's twin brothers would get some extra schooling that way when they started working at the factory next year. Clark's looked after their workers better than a lot of factories. Street was thriving, with a growing population. Without the Clark family and their generosity, Street would be a poor, small, rural community with few prospects for work. The cottage was silent when she entered, which surprised Kate. Her ma was usually singing as she worked in the kitchen, getting supper ready for when Pa walked through the door. He hated to be kept waiting, and expected a hot meal on the table when he got home from a hard day's work, mainly so that he could eat it, then take himself off to the street inn for the evening. "Ma?" she called out, heading through the parlour to the kitchen at the back of the house. "Did you lose track of the time? You know Pa will only be 5 minutes behind me. What can I do to help?" "Oh!" She gasped in shock at the sight of her mother lying on the stone flagstones of the kitchen. "Ma!" She rushed to her side, falling to her knees. She put a trembling hand on her mother's forehead, gently brushing a few stray locks of hair off her face. Her skin was cool and clammy. She looked so pale. "Oh, dear Lord, Ma, please be all right," she whispered. Her mother groaned and opened her eyes. Kate nearly wept with relief. "Ma, whatever's happened?" she asked. She looked confused for a moment, squeezing her eyes shut and grimacing. I'm not sure. I was taking the pot off the range." They both looked towards the range, where a pot of what must have been stew had tumbled to the stone hearth. It had cracked and split into 3 large pieces. Meat and vegetables and gravy were pooled on the floor between where her mother lay and the black cast-iron range where she cooked all their meals. "Oh, no," her mother cried. "Kate, love, help me up. Whatever will your father say?" Kate gently helped her to stand and led her to a chair next to the table. "Sit down, Ma. I'll clear this up." "But what are we going to feed your father? And that was my best stew pot. I'm so stupid. He'll be hungry and there's nothing ready." Kate was more concerned about why her mother had collapsed, but she could see she was getting het up at the thought of the ruined meal. She urged her mother into a seat. "Don't worry, Ma. Let's have a look at you. Have you hurt yourself? Do you remember what happened?" The older woman slumped into the chair Kate had pulled out and leaned her elbows on the table, putting her head in her hand. She said, raising her head to give her daughter a reassuring smile that Kate did not for 1 minute believe, not when her ma's hands were shaking so. "I can't for the life of me think what happened. I must have slipped on something. 1 minute I was picking up the pot, then there you were, leaning over me, and I'm lolloping on the floor." Kate frowned. She hadn't heard a crash as she'd come into the cottage. That pot would have made a heck of a racket when it smashed. The spilt food wasn't steaming, so she suspected Ma had been on the floor for quite a while. "I think you might have fainted, Ma. You were out cold when I got here." At first, she thought her mother was going to deny it, but instead, she opened her mouth to say something, then paused. She took a deep breath, touching the side of her head. Kate could see a lump forming. She must have hit her head when she went down. "Maybe you're right, love," she said. I think I remember feeling a bit dizzy." "Oh, Ma, did you even bother to eat anything today? You've been missing meals, haven't you?" It was clear to Kate she had lost weight. She shook her head, looking away. "I've not been hungry," she said. "Everything I eat these days seems to disagree with me." Before Kate could respond, her father appeared in the doorway. "What the blazes is going on here?" he demanded, as he took in the mess on the floor. "Ma's poorly, Pa," said Kate, as her mother tried to shush her. I'm all right," she argued. "I'm sorry, Reggie, love. I don't know how I could be so clumsy. Give me 10 minutes and I'll get your dinner. Betty Searle gave me a dozen eggs. How about a nice cheese omelette?" "I'll do it," Kate began, only to have her father's cursing drown out her words. "Are you bloody kidding me?" he roared. "I work my fingers to the bone to put food on this table." He slammed his fist down on the wooden surface. "And come home to find good meat all over the floor, you sitting on your ass and offering me a damned omelette." Alarmed, Kate stepped in front of her mother, who was crying and cowering in front of her enraged husband. "Pa, she's ill. She fainted. Look at the lump on her head. We need to take her to the doctor." "She's all right," he sneered. "Probably fell asleep and fell off her chair, the lazy mare. It's bad enough she's wasted my dinner. I'm not throwing more money away on a doctor. She needs to pull herself together." "But—" Kate started to argue, only to be rewarded by a slap. "Ow! What was that for?" "Don't you dare question me, girl. You're as bad as your useless mother. I'll be needing extra to feed myself tonight, seeing as how she's thrown my dinner all over the damned floor." He glared at his wife. "Pathetic." He shook his head and turned away. "Clean up this mess. I'm going to the pub." The silence after he slammed the front door was finally broken by her mother's soft sobs. "Oh, Ma, don't cry," whispered Kate, as she wrapped an arm around her mother's thin shoulders. "It wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was," she wept. "I didn't have his dinner on the table and he took it out on you." She stroked a trembling hand down her daughter's cheek. "I'm sorry you got a wallop because of my clumsiness, my darling girl. You didn't deserve that."
She certainly didn't deserve it, but Kate wasn't about to agree with her ma and add to her unwarranted feelings of guilt.
"Hush now. Let's get you up to bed. You look exhausted."
She put a finger to her ma's lips when she began to argue.
"I'll clean up this mess, and I'll boil a couple of those nice eggs Mrs. Searle brought round, eh? We can have a little picnic on your bed."
After helping her upstairs, Kate was reluctant to leave her ma alone. She was worried about that bump on her head, as well as how frail she had seemed as she'd helped her into her nightdress. She silently cursed her pa for being so selfish. He never showed ma any respect, even though she was the sweetest woman. Instead, he treated her like a doormat, and now it was clear she wasn't well, he'd gone off to the street inn and left his wife to suffer alone, while he spent money they could have used to get a doctor on more cider.
"Will you be all right for a few minutes while I pop and get Peg?" "Whatever do you need to bother your sister about at this time of day?" her mother asked.
"She'll want to know you're poorly," said Kate. "She can sit and chat with you while I clean up the kitchen."
Her mother seemed to shrink into the bedcovers.
"Please, Kate, don't tell Peg or your brothers. I had a funny turn, but I'll be right as rain after a little rest, I'm sure. I don't want you worrying anyone, lass."
Kate sat on the bed and gently brushed her mother's hair back from her face.
"I'm worried about you, Ma. I wish you'd let me get Peg."
She shook her head.
"No, lass. Leave her be. She'll be giving her Will his supper about now. He's her priority now, and that's as it should be." "And you should be Pa's priority, not his cider cups," she argued.
Ma sighed.
"It is what it is, Kate. He works hard and deserves the chance to relax after work."
Kate could barely hold back a snort. She'd never known Pa to do any more than he absolutely had to, which would give him the opportunity to earn a lot more money if he only got his finger out and got on with it. Fred said Pa was always finding ways to avoid work, and was often on the sharp end of Mr. Clement's tongue when he was caught skiving. He also took every penny of Kate's wages, doling out a few pennies of pocket money now and again. She didn't even know how much she earned, because he collected her pay packets. He'd been doing this since she started work, saying he'd done the same for all her siblings until they got married and left home.
"It's my money," he'd said. "I put a roof over your head, food in your belly, and clothes on your back. It's about time you paid your way after wasting so much time at school. It never did me any harm, leaving at 12 and earning my crust. Why they let girls stay until they're 14 now is beyond me. I told your ma, you don't need no book learning to earn a wage or run a house. But she's soft, that bloody woman, and now you're probably ruined. Mind you don't let on to any lads who come courting that you're too clever for your own good, or we'll never get rid of you."
No, her pa didn't work hard. He expected everyone else to, though. And more than once when she first started work, he'd punished her for wasting thread and having her wages docked. She'd learned fast that keeping her pa happy was just as important as staying in Mr. Breyer's good books. When Peg had married, Kate had been brave enough to ask Pa how he would manage when she got wed too. After all, with no other children left at home, the only wage coming in would be his. He'd snarled that he'd send Ma back out to work.
"But don't think you're getting away any time soon, lass. You owe me a few years yet, you ungrateful little madam."
It was the thought that her ma would be left to the mercy of her selfish bully of a husband without anyone to help her that had made Kate silently promise that she would never marry and abandon Ma. Her friends had been horrified when she'd told them. But Kate had shrugged.
"What's all the fuss about marriage anyway? I'd only be swapping Pa for some other man who'd control my life. Only he'd expect his rights in the marriage bed as well, and then keep me tied to the kitchen sink with a load of snivelling kiddies."
She shuddered at the thought.
"Promise me, Kate."
Her mother's voice brought her thoughts back to the present.
"I don't want anyone else to know about this. I'm all right. You mustn't go worrying them."
Kate sighed.
"All right, Ma. Don't fret. I won't say anything yet. But you must promise me that you'll rest now, and if you're not better soon, I'll have to tell them, and we'll have to find a way to get you to the doctor.
God knows we can't rely on Pa to look after you." That her mother simply nodded and lay back without arguing spoke volumes. By the time Kate had made, she found her mother deeply asleep. She didn't have the heart to wake her. Chapter 4. The twins, Peter and John, inhaled their supper as if afraid someone would come and steal it from their plates. "Slow down, boys," said their mother with an affectionate smile. "I spent all afternoon making that pie, so I'd appreciate it if you took longer than a few seconds to savour it." "It's tasty, Ma," said Peter. "Is there any more?" asked John, his mouth still full. "Manners," scolded Jeannie. "No talking with your mouth full." "And no seconds," said Lucas. "We're not made of money. What's left of this pie will make another meal tomorrow." "But I'm still hungry," complained John. "Then have a piece of bread," said Lucas. "Just stop whining like a girl." "A girl wouldn't eat as much as him," said Peter, grinning. John grumbled some more as he slathered the piece of bread Ma cut for him with butter and some of the fresh raspberry jam she'd made this week. He fell silent while he ate it, giving them all some peace in which to finish their meals at leisure. "Hey, Lucas," said Peter. "Alfie said his older brother has enlisted." Lucas frowned as Jeannie cast an anxious glance at their mother. As she expected, Ma had gone pale. Jeannie wanted to tell Peter to shut up, talking about the war around her. Their mother was prone to terrible anxiety since their pa had been killed in an accident at the factory when the twins were tiny. He'd been helping repair a cargo lift that had jammed. It had fallen on him, crushing and killing him instantly. One day he'd been there, then he'd been gone. And now Ma would often fall into a pit of despair and worry when she thought about anything happening to any of her children. The declaration of war had thrown her into a panic, and it had taken days to calm her down and assure her that the boys were all too young to fight, and anyway, they were friends and pacifists. Jeannie just hoped it would all be over soon, so that none of the boys were faced with the dilemma of refusing to take up arms. "More fool him," said Lucas. "He said if we all refused to fight, the Kaiser would come for us next, and we'd all be killed, and anyone left would be slaves to the Germans." "Peter," Jeannie hissed, glaring at him while directing her glance sideways towards their mother. "Did you pass that arithmetic test you had today?" Peter's ears went pink, and his mouth turned down as he realised Ma was getting upset. Of course he did," said John, looking put out. "So how come he can make sense of his numbers and I can't?" Lucas chuckled. "You could too if you bothered to pay attention like he does." "Promise me, boys," said Ma, just as Jeannie was beginning to think the change of topic had cleared the air. "What, Ma?" asked John. "Promise me you won't fight. None of you. It's wrong, and I couldn't bear to lose any of you, or for any other mother to lose their sons at my boys' hands." "We might not get any choice, Ma," said Peter, nearly in tears. "Alfie says—" "Just shut up about what Alfie says." Lucas raised a finger and pointed it at Peter, silencing him. "He's a kid. What does he know? We have to trust Mr. Asquith knows what he's doing, and like he says, it will all be over by Christmas." "And if it isn't?" said Jeannie, putting a hand on Ma's shoulder, trying to reassure her. "We will do as every other friend will do, and stick to the peace testimony. The Clark family will do the same, I'm sure. So will a lot of people around here." John scoffed. "I'll bet the Clarks won't go to jail if they won't fight. But who's going to stop us being locked up?" "Show some respect," snapped Lucas. "The Clarks put food on our table and a roof over our heads. They're humble people who will do what is right, and we should follow their lead. If it means going to jail for our beliefs, then so be it." Ma put her hands to her face. "Please, boys, don't argue over this. I can't bear it." Jeannie stood up and began gathering the plates. "John, Go and heat up some water so you can start the washing up. Peter, you can dry up. She shoved the plates into John's hands. Don't argue, she said, when he opened his mouth. She lowered her voice. It's your turn. Ma needs a break, and we're all sick of hearing you two going on about things we told you not to discuss in this house. So just get on with it. She turned to Ma. Come on, Ma. Let's sit in the garden for a while. It's still light out, and warm enough that we won't need our coats. Are there any gooseberries left on the bushes? Maybe we can do a gooseberry fool for pudding on Sunday. I'll fetch a bowl, shall I? An hour later, Ma was calmer and went inside to prepare for bed. The twins had gone down the road to kick a ball around with a friend, and would no doubt only come back when it was too dark to see, unless Lucas went to look for them. Jeannie remained alone on the wooden bench her father had made, enjoying the cool, late summer evening. You all right, sis? Lucas came and sat beside her. I had words with the twins. They'll not be talking about the war in front of Ma again. Good. The stupid boy should know better. I know. That's why I put them right. Are they expecting you to go and fight? She hoped not. That would mean they were thinking about going too. Lord knows what it would do to Ma. He shrugged. I've no plans to enlist. I read the peace testimony again when we heard the news, and I agree with it, even though I think the Kaiser is wrong and should be stopped. Killing each other isn't going to solve the problem. The government needs to talk to the German government, come to some accord. He sighed. Things are getting tense in the clicking room. Half the lads are itching to sign up and rush off to foreign soil, while the rest of us won't go willingly. Some of the old chaps who fought in the Boer War are cautioning against fighting, while others are egging the lads on, telling them it will make men of them. I hate this, she said. Kate says if women could vote, there wouldn't be a war. She's probably right, but I can't see the suffragettes winning their cause now. All anyone cares about is winning this damned war. Of course, the excuse will be that we men need to protect the women folk, and giving them a say in affairs of state would weaken our ability to do so. She nodded. I know. I wonder if German lads are having the same conversations with their sisters. He laughed softly. Probably. I don't suppose they're much different from us, are they? Jeannie shivered as she imagined other brothers and sisters on these shores and in Germany, all frightened, at least those of them with any sense. None of them wanting this war, yet at the mercy of just a few men who felt it was their right to claim power and decide for everyone else. Anyway, let's not fret about it now. There's enough daft boys rushing to prove themselves. Like Alfie's big brother, she said. We can't stop them, sis. We can only look within our own consciences and do what we believe is right. She nodded, feeling helpless. All right. Let's change the subject. How do you fancy coming up Collard Hill with us on Sunday afternoon? Who's us? He asked, narrowing his eyes. Me and Kate are saving Louisa from having to attend the Holy Trinity picnic with Horace from the counting house. You probably know him. He's your age. Spotty lad, greasy hair, laughs like a donkey. He laughed. I know him. Why on earth would a lass like Louisa Clements be walking out with him? Jeannie knew what he meant. Louisa, with her blue eyes and blonde hair and lovely figure, was one of the prettiest girls in street. She was far too good for the likes of Horace. That's the point, she said. She doesn't want to, but her ma and his have decided they're a good, which is why we're going up Collard Hill on Sunday. Say you'll come. If there's a few of us, we can have a good laugh. He pulled a face. I don't want to hang around with a load of girls. She rolled her eyes. You wouldn't be the only lad. In fact, she felt her cheeks getting warm as she formed her next words. I was hoping you'd bring Mattie along. When he frowned, she rushed on. And someone else. I don't know, maybe another lad from the cutting room, or someone from the meeting house. Not anyone who goes to Holy Trinity, because Louisa says her ma has already tried to push her towards most of them, and not a one has taken her fancy. Why do you want Mattie to come? He asked. ignoring everything else she'd said. She looked down the garden, not wanting him to see how mortified she felt.
Actually, it was Louisa who asked if he could be invited.
Her pa wouldn't approve of Mattie, he said, still watching her closely. He's a friend, and a bit of a lad, too. You know how he likes to laugh and joke. Mr. Clements isn't keen on anyone who isn't serious.
Jeannie agreed, and hoped with all her heart that this fancy Louisa had for Mattie would die a death soon. But she also had to admit to herself, but never to her brother, that she'd always had a soft spot for Mattie Searle. He was handsome and a charmer. He could always make her smile. She had an awful feeling that Louisa and Mattie would make a perfect couple, and she dreaded the thought of them finally meeting properly, especially if she had to be there to witness it.
"Look,"
she said, blowing out an impatient breath.
"I promised to ask, but if you don't want to come, that's fine by me. Us girls can go on our own."
In fact, she'd be relieved. Maybe keeping the two of them apart a little longer would give Louisa the chance to find someone else and leave Mattie to her. After all, Jeannie had far more in common with him than Louisa did, and Jeannie had secretly carried a torch for him for a lot longer than her friend had. She stood up.
"I'm going to bed. Can you chase down the twins and get them in? And tell them to do some chores for Ma tomorrow. They seem to think they can lollop in bed or go out with their chums just because it's the school holidays. It's about time they did their bit."
"Yeah," said Lucas. "I'll tell them. The garden needs weeding, and they can clean the windows."
"Right. I'll suggest Ma is sure to supervise them, or they'll be pulling up her best plants and leaving streaks all over the windows."
"Like we did, you mean?"
He grinned at her, and she laughed at the shared memory.
"Exactly. They've got to learn, just like we did."
She turned and opened the kitchen door.
"Jeannie?"
His voice stopped her.
"Hmm?"
"I'll speak to Mattie and maybe Ted Jackson about Collard Hill."
"Oh, all right, if you're sure."
Ted was Holy Trinity, but Louisa hadn't mentioned him. And anyway, she was interested in Mattie, so she was sure her friend wouldn't mind.
He shrugged. "I'll see what they say. Night."
"Night."
She climbed the stairs to the room she shared with Ma, feeling both scared and excited at the prospect of an afternoon with Mattie Searle. But she had a horrible feeling that he would never see her as anything more than Lucas's sister. Chapter 5. Lucas regretted mentioning the walk to Collard Hill as soon as he saw Mattie's eyes light up.
"So Jeannie's friend Louisa Clements is going to be there?" he asked. "The blonde one who lives up Somerton Road?" "And Kate Davis, the brunette one who lives in Silver Road," he said, keeping his tone bored. "I said I'd ask, but I don't see the point of wasting an afternoon with some daft lasses."
He knew that most of the lads his age were keen on impressing girls, but he'd never met a girl yet that he thought was anything special. He'd rather spend his free time with his pals. He'd hoped that Mattie would agree with him, but it looked like he wanted to go on this walk.
"I've been trying to drum up the courage to speak to her for ages," said Mattie. "This is perfect." "You know her pa is my foreman, don't you? And he's Holy Trinity. He'll not want you sniffing around his daughter. He wanted her to go to the church picnic with Horace. That's why her friends have organised this outing."
Mattie grinned.
"She's too good for that spotty Four Eyes. I'm in."
Lucas suppressed a sigh.
"Really? Wouldn't you rather do something else? When the prettiest girl in the village is begging to be rescued from a fate worse than death with Horace? Not on your Nelly, mate. Come on, it'll be a laugh."
He shrugged.
"My idea of a laugh doesn't include my sister and her giggling friends."
Mattie shook his head, smirking.
"You know, you're turning into an old man before your time, Lucas, my friend."
He jabbed him on the arm.
"Girls giggle because they like us. You know the easiest way to shut them up is to kiss them, don't you?"
Lucas glared at him.
"No one is going to kiss my sister and live to tell the tale."
Mattie backed up,
putting his hands up in surrender. His eyes were wide, although Lucas could see they were still full of humour. Whoa, hold on there. I wouldn't kiss your Jeannie. I mean, she's a lovely girl, but, well, she's your sister. I know better than that. Good. He felt out. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't mind trying to steal a kiss from the lovely Louisa. Mattie winked. I'm more scared of you than I am of old man Clements. Lucas groaned. No kissing my sister's friends, Mattie. At least not while I'm there. I'm supposed to be watching out for them, not acting as matchmaker. He laughed. I'm not planning on wedding her, Lucas. I'm too young to settle down. But don't worry. I doubt she'll let me kiss her until she gets to know me anyway.
Huh. If she's got any sense, she'll be even less inclined to let you kiss her once she does get to know you.
Mattie laughed at Lucas's grumpy tone. We'll see. So, who else is going? I thought I'd ask Teddy. Mattie looked surprised. For your Jeannie? He's Holy Trinity.